Today on Law Weekly, we talk judicial reforms, how to improve the perception of the judiciary, and the kind of justice minister President Muhammadu Buhari should appoint. We have the views of a senior advocate of Nigeria, Olisa Agbakoba. We also have the opinions of two senior lawyers on the appointment to the bench and how to make the justice system work more efficiently, plus our weekly recap of the top trending stories from the courtrooms. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Shola Shieli. Since his re-election, President Muhammadu Buhari has been speaking a lot about restructuring and true federalism. But how should he go about achieving this? There are those who think that he should set up a committee to fast-track the process, and yet others who say that there is enough material already generated by previous governments on the issue. My guest, senior advocate of Nigeria, Olisa Agbakoba, was a member of the last national conference of former President Goodluck Jonathan. And so I began the interview with his views on restructuring and true federalism.
I think there's been enough talk about restructuring and devolution. So many conferences going down to Abacha, Obasanjo, Jonathan. I think the time has come for us to simplify the myth around restructuring. Because sometimes restructuring creates a fear. It's like a monster. So what is restructuring? It's simply rebalancing the power in the hands of the federal government, has contained in the exclusive legislative list and the concurrent. There are 68 items of power in the exclusive and 30 in the concurrent, meaning 98. And the federal government has first bite, so that the state governments are excluded if the federal government acts on the 30 items on the concurrent. And that's too much power. So restructuring simply means taking away from the federal government those things that it does not do well, like issuing driver's license, like issuing marriage certificates, business certificates, education at the basic level, agriculture, housing. These things should leave the center and go to the states. That's restructuring. And it can be done in 3 months. No need for big conferences. I wouldn't expect the president to have a big conference to say, I want to have a constitutional conference 2019 and submit report to me. Then I would, no. He has enough material to do the work. It's the only way Nigeria will take off.
When you say he has enough material, what do you mean? Should he dust up reports of previous panel?
Absolutely. The reports of the past have provided him enough material to make sensible decisions. All the conferences agreed on one thing, that the center is too strong. They also agreed the need to refederate. What was not agreed was whether the refederation would be at states or regional, and whether the regional will expand from 6 to 8. So some say there should be a new Midwest zone and a new Central zone. Whatever, a conference of wise men across Nigeria can sit and give us a basic, simple, framework upon which the president can work.
One of the things that the president also recently talked about was the appointment of more judicial officers. How do you think that should happen?
The judiciary should be ashamed of themselves that the president has taken the lunch from their mouth. Never in the history of Nigeria has any president ever made such a request. Unlike in the US, where the Supreme Court appointment is made by the president because he's empowered. Here, it's actually the NJC. For some reason, even when I tried to get onto the bench 20 years ago, for some reason, it suits the NJC to make it an exclusive club. Right now, I think there are about 15. So the president is saying, if you guys say that you're overworked, then why don't you go to 21? So I salute him for that. And I do hope that the NJC will meet as soon as possible and pass on the names to him for appointment. And by the way, I should say I'd like to be appointed myself. I've always wanted to be in the Supreme Court. And the last time I think it came up, my name went forward, but I don't know what became of it.
So are you saying that they should look outside of the traditional in the modes of appointing?
It cannot just be, promoting appeal court judges. There'll be a need to look outside of the traditional, zones of appointment and look to mix the bench, mix the Supreme Court bench, academia, the bar. It'll make it more interesting.
The president also recently approved the recommendation of the NJC on the retirement of Justice Onoge and CJN. But there are those who say that perhaps the NJC was hasty in recommending his retirement, especially with all the pending cases in court. What do you think?
It's a political settlement. That's what has happened. I'm not sure that if we fought, there were two things playing out. The legal cases as to whether the CJN, the former CJN, was or was not properly removed, and the NJC process. So I think at the point, when it became very obvious that this was something that the former CJN thought wasn't worth pursuing, he said he would retire. And I salute President Buhari again for accepting the voluntary retirement, because it puts spade to all the question, has he resigned? What happens if he wins his cases in the courts? So now he's pursuing the cases in court for personal vindication. So if he wins in the Supreme Court, the decision of the CCT, that will be to personally vindicate him. So with the acceptance of the retirement of CJ Onogen, the matter is over.
But the perception of the judiciary is at an all-time low. Yes. What do you think that the acting CJN can do, to improve the perception that people have of the judiciary?
Just to make everybody know that it works. He needs to get together a group of wise men to pick up from where the late Justice Dahiru Mustafa stopped. In my view, Dahiru Mustafa has been the most proactive CJN in recent memory, because he got us all together, 29 of us, and we looked at a number of things: the framework of the judiciary, how the cases go, speed of justice, quality of the judiciary, and everything, and it's there. So all the current acting CJ needs to do is to implement. You see, we must not keep reinventing the wheel. When every new guy comes, then you start all over. It's there. Unfortunately, the perception of the man on the streets about us is very low. So I think one of the most important tasks for the acting CJN will be to begin to attempt to give the judiciary the glory it deserves. So it should start from opening the books of the late Justice Dahiru Mustafa.
But what was the key recommendation of that panel?
The key recommendation was speed. You can't have a case in court for 9 years. Nobody will have confidence. And in order to have speed in the judicial process, you must do a number of things. And those details I don't think I need to bore your viewers with. But the key thing was speed. And when you talk about speed, you will talk about rules of court. The rules of court have to be modernized. The nature of judges who go on the bench must be current. Once you've done that, it'll be easy to get on with, the work of the judiciary.
One of the things that the federal government came to power on the back of was the agenda to fight graft. Are you satisfied with the way that the federal government went about it in its first term, and what can they do better in this second term?
There has to be a strategy. There wasn't a strategy in the first 4 years. There's got to be a strategy, and the strategy will start from what does the president seek to achieve? And I think that must be headed by the Attorney General. So we must have a strategy on tackling corruption. And it's not just about court cases. There are all sorts of things. But once that strategy is in place, then You unbundle the strategy and you unpack it and make sure that it fits into whatever relevant, packet. So for the judicial arm and prosecution, the government has to fund corruption cases. I expect the government to put down at least 5 billion naira. You just can't pay lawyers 30,000 naira and expect that they'll fight corruption cases for you. You must fund prosecution. It's key. It's beyond the Ministry of Justice. They need outside assistance. So you must prepare to put down a budget to fight those cases. That's one. You must strengthen the prosecutorial process. I have a problem with the composition of the EFCC. I think the EFCC is taking on far too much. No disrespect to Mr. Magu, just that it's taking on far too much. It's doing investigation, prosecution, and assets management. It's too much. Investigation is enough. The strategy of the new government should include a national prosecution service. It is no longer possible for the Attorney General to run a law practice under his ministry, headed up by the Director of Public Prosecutions. It needs to be dislocated and made into a full-time executive agency, headed up by the DPP, if you like, but it will be called the National Prosecution Service.
It will be different.
Oh, it's different because he has full powers. Full powers. Full powers. The file will not lie in the AG's office because he's not there. The National Prosecution Service will have full authority. And the National Prosecution Service will be deployed across the zones, what the Americans call federal prosecutors. The federal prosecutor of New York does not need the authority of the U.S. Attorney General. So in that way, you decentralize the prosecutorial powers. So if a case of graft comes from Enugu, it will be dealt with there. No need to all bunch up. Everything's bunching up. You see, we have this centrifugal federalism. Everything center. So we must unpack. We must decentralize. So that, for me, is key to the success of the anti-graft strategy.
You've said a lot about the role of the AGF, but what kind of Attorney General do you think that the country needs at a time like now?
A super active Attorney General. A super active, because the world has changed. You need an Attorney General who is not only a law and order man. You need an Attorney General who is also a law and development man. I don't know why it hasn't occurred to us in Nigeria that law plays a very strong role in economic development. That's the whole notion of development law. A lot of what happens abroad, law is central to it. Just take money and access to money. It's law. It's law. Access to credit. It's law. So I'd like to see an Attorney General whose grasp of issues is not just the old justice issues. So the AGF must be one who is not traditional, who's been known for law and order, criminal justice type things, rule of law. They're important, but an AGF has to have a 360 degrees, thinking process. So I categorize it in two: law and order. But law and order has a link to law and development. So these are the two key criteria for an AG. The prisons, the police, how it works, but also he's very conversant with economics. For instance, I'm an economic specialist, and that has helped me to understand how, law has a role to play with development. So one needs an AG that can interpret the measure of money, because if you're talking about inflation, and they ask the AG, so how do we, he's got a role to play, because he's the number one minister. That's why he sits closest to the president. So I think I might be wrong, but this is my strong thinking. And that AG must be someone who has a very strong role in law and development and law and order, and a very strong role in legislative advocacy and planning. The AG should be able to put together the mass of legislation required to drive the program of the government. That's on the AG's table. So he must be a man who can multitask. That's who I expect to be our AG.